My beloved brothers and sisters, when life feels impossible, when the heart is heavy and the mind is exhausted, when you've tried every door and found them all closed, this is often the moment we begin to question everything. We ask ourselves, why me? We wonder how much more we can carry. And sometimes silently, we fear that perhaps we have been forgotten. But let me remind you of something powerful today. You are never forgotten by Allah. There are moments when life pushes you to the edge, not to throw you off, but to teach you where true support comes from. You see, when everything around you collapses, when people walk away, when plans fail and strength fades, Allah is gently pulling your heart back to Him. Because the one who created you knows exactly how much you can bear, and He knows exactly when to open the way forward. What seems impossible to you is not difficult for Allah. The same Lord who split the sea, who provided for Maryam without explanation, who turned fear into safety and weakness into strength, is the same Lord watching over you right now. Your delay is not denial. Your hardship is not punishment. Sometimes it is simply preparation for a mercy greater than you ever imagined. So when life feels impossible, don't lose hope. That is often the moment when Allah is preparing a way you could never design on your own. A way that will leave you stronger, closer, and more grateful than ever before. Hold on, because Allah always makes a way. When everything feels impossible, it is very easy for the heart to assume that Allah has turned away, that perhaps we are being ignored or left alone to struggle. But in reality, the moments when human solutions disappear are often the moments when divine help is closest. Allah, in His infinite wisdom, sometimes allows every visible door to close so that the servant finally looks upward instead of around. This is not abandonment, it is alignment. It is Allah gently, sometimes firmly redirecting the heart back to where it was always meant to rely. Human beings are wired to depend on what they can see and control. We trust our plans, our strength, our connections, and our calculations. As long as something seems workable, as long as there is one option left, we cling to it with everything we have. But that reliance can quietly replace true tawakkul. Not because we intend to forget Allah, but because comfort and familiarity make us feel safe. When those supports are suddenly removed, panic sets in. The heart feels exposed. The mind races. Yet this is often the very moment Allah wants to teach us the most profound lesson of faith. That help was never coming from those means in the first place. When Allah allows a person to reach the point where they say, I have no idea how this will work, that statement, though filled with fear, is also filled with honesty. It is the collapse of illusion. It is the moment the servant realizes their limitations. And it is precisely there that reliance on Allah becomes pure, not mixed with pride, not diluted by self-confidence, but sincere, broken, humble dependence. That is a state beloved to Allah. There is a unique sweetness in turning to Allah when there is nowhere else to turn. The dua made at that moment is different. It is not polished. It is not rehearsed. It comes straight from a heart that knows it cannot survive without divine intervention. Tears flow easily. Words may fail, but sincerity fills the space. And Allah, who hears even what is not spoken, responds in ways that the servant could never predict. Many people assume that Allah's help must come in the exact form they are expecting. They wait for the same door to reopen, the same person to return, the same plan to succeed. But Allah's help is often far more expensive. When one path closes, it may be because continuing down, it would have harmed you, limited you, or delayed something far better. Allah does not merely rescue, He replaces. He does not just repair, He upgrades. Feels like loss in the moment can later be recognized as protection. It is important to understand that Allah's timing is not cruelty, and His delays are not neglect. Sometimes help does not arrive immediately because the heart is still attached to the wrong outcome, still hoping for something that Allah, in His mercy, knows is not good. So the difficulty continues, not to punish, but to detach. Slowly, the heart begins to let go. Slowly, expectations change. And when the heart finally says, Ya Allah, I leave this entirely in your hands, the door opens sometimes quietly, sometimes suddenly, but always perfectly. There are countless stories of people who reached the edge of despair only to later realize that those moments reshape their entire relationship with Allah. Before the hardship, faith may have been routine. After it, faith becomes lifeline. Salah is no longer rushed. Du'a is no longer occasional. Gratitude is no longer conditional. The believer begins to see Allah not only as the one they worship, but as the one who carries them through what they could never survive alone. What we often forget is that Allah is capable of creating ease from the very source of difficulty. The same situation that drains you today may be the reason for your strength tomorrow. The same pain that bends you may later be the reason you stand taller. Allah does not waste suffering, not a tear, not a sleepless night, not a moment of confusion. Every ounce of struggle is either removing something harmful or making room for something better. When all solutions disappear, it forces the believer to confront a powerful truth: Allah was always enough. The problem was never the lack of options, it was the lack of trust. And once that trust begins to grow, the heart finds peace even before the situation changes. That peace itself is a form of divine help. Because when the heart is calm, even the storm feels temporary. In those moments, when life feels impossible, remind yourself that Allah specializes in the impossible. He creates pathways where none seem to exist. He brings relief from places you never expected. And sometimes, the greatest gift He gives is not the immediate removal of hardship, but the strength, patience, and closeness to Him that emerges through it. When you look back, you may realize that the moment you felt most helpless was the moment Allah was shaping you most profoundly. When we say that what feels impossible to us is effortless for Allah, we are not speaking in poetry or exaggeration. We are stating a fundamental truth about who Allah is. Human beings measure difficulty based on limitation. We see size, numbers, time, strength, and resources. And we conclude what can or cannot be done. Allah, however, is not bound by any of these. He is not restricted by time, exhausted by repetition, or challenged by complexity. What overwhelms the human mind is already fully under His control. The problem often lies in how small we allow our understanding of Allah to become during hardship. When life collapses, fear shrinks our vision. We begin to imagine that our problem is too complicated, too messy, too far gone to be fixed. We forget that Allah created complexity itself. The one who perfectly aligned the stars, who regulates every heartbeat without confusion, who sustains billions of lives simultaneously, is not challenged by the details of your situation. Your crisis does not add weight to His power. When Allah wants something to happen, it does not require stages, effort, or struggle. He does not need time to think, resources to gather, or conditions to be perfect. His command is instant and absolute. This reality is meant to comfort the believer, not just intellectually, but emotionally. Because if Allah is capable of everything, then nothing you are facing is truly impossible. The only question is not whether He can, but how and when He wills. Yet many people struggle with this truth, because they look at their circumstances instead of the one who controls them. They see years of delay, repeated failures, unanswered du'a, and they begin to doubt not necessarily Allah's power, but His concern for them. This is where faith is tested. To believe Allah is powerful is one thing. To believe that His power is actively working in your life, even when you see no signs, is another level entirely. Often Allah allows impossibility to become visible so that when relief comes, there is no confusion about its source. When the solution arrives from a direction you never anticipated, when it bypasses logic and expectation, the heart is forced to acknowledge that this could only have been Allah. This is why some prayers are answered in ways that leave us speechless. You look back and realize that if even one small detail had been different, the outcome would not have occurred. That precision is not coincidence. It is divine planning. It is also important to understand that Allah's ability to make a way does not mean the way will always be comfortable. Ease does not always mean the absence of struggle. Sometimes Allah creates a path through the difficulty rather than around it. He gives patience when you ask for relief. He gives clarity when you ask for answers. He gives endurance when you ask for escape. These are not lesser gifts, they are often greater because they transform the believer from the inside out. People often assume that if Allah truly wanted to help, the hardship would end immediately. But immediate relief is not always the most merciful outcome. A problem removed too quickly might leave the heart unchanged. Allah is not only concerned with solving your situation, He is concerned with saving your soul. If hardship brings you closer to Him, makes you more sincere, more humble, more aware of your dependence on Him, then that hardship has served a purpose far beyond comfort. What feels impossible is also often the space where miracles occur. Not always miracles that are dramatic or visible to others, but personal miracles of resilience, healing, and faith. A heart that should have broken but didn't. A believer who should have given up but kept praying. A person who lost everything except the connection to Allah and discovered that this connection was enough to rebuild everything else. When you truly internalize that Allah is not limited by your reality, fear begins to loosen its grip. The future becomes less threatening. You may not know how things will unfold, but you know who is in control. That knowledge alone changes how you endure the present. You stop demanding explanations and start seeking nearness. You stop measuring outcomes and start strengthening trust. There is a profound peace that comes from realizing that impossibility is a human concept, not a divine one. To Allah, there is no difference between creating something from nothing and changing something already in existence. Both are equally easy. So when you stand before Him with a heart full of worries, remember that you are not presenting Him with a challenge. You are presenting Him with an opportunity for mercy, wisdom, and perfect decree. In the end, believing that what feels impossible is effortless for Allah does not mean you will never feel fear or pain. It means that fear will not define you and pain will not destroy you. Because beneath it all is the quiet certainty that Allah is able, Allah is aware, and Allah is already making a way, even if you cannot see it yet. Many people assume that trials are meant to crush them, to weaken them, or to serve as evidence that they are failing in the sight of Allah. When hardship stretches on and relief feels distant, the heart begins to whisper painful questions. Why is this happening to me? What did I do wrong? Am I being punished? Yet this understanding of trials is incomplete. Trials, especially the ones that feel unbearable, are not designed to break the believer. They are designed to refine them. They are not signs of rejection, but tools of elevation. Allah does not test someone to discover their strength. He already knows it. The test exists so that the servant comes to know himself. Hardship reveals what comfort often hides. It exposes where reliance truly lies, how sincere faith really is, and whether patience is conditional or rooted in trust. When life is smooth, belief can feel effortless. When life becomes heavy, belief becomes intentional. Every act of patience in that moment carries weight. Every prayer offered through exhaustion carries honor. Every moment of restraint and hope is recorded with meaning. A trial stretches the soul in ways ease never can. When everything is going well, the heart often drifts. Gratitude becomes routine, worship becomes mechanical, and awareness of Allah becomes background noise. But when pain enters, it demands attention. It brings the heart back to the center. Suddenly, Du'a is no longer optional. Tears flow without effort. The believer speaks to Allah with honesty instead of formality. In this vulnerability, something powerful happens. The relationship with Allah deepens. Elevation through trials does not always look like visible success. Sometimes the elevation is internal. A person may not gain wealth, status, or immediate relief, but they gain something far more valuable, clarity. They learn what truly matters. They learn who stands by them and who does not. They learn that their worth is not tied to outcomes, but to sincerity. Allah raises the believer by purifying intentions, removing arrogance, and replacing self-reliance with humility. It is important to understand that not all trials are equal, and not all people are tested in the same way. Allah knows exactly what each heart needs. For one person, loss may be the test. For another, delay. For another, rejection. And for another, responsibility. Each trial is tailored, not random. Allah does not give a test that serves no purpose. Every hardship carries within it a lesson, even if that lesson is only recognized much later. Sometimes trials elevate by stripping away illusions. We often believe we are in control until life proves otherwise. When plans collapse repeatedly, the ego weakens. Pride dissolves. The believer begins to see how fragile human effort truly is. This is not meant to humiliate, but to liberate. When you stop carrying the burden of control, you make space for trust. And trust in Allah lifts the heart in ways no achievement ever could. One of the most overlooked aspects of trials is how they build resilience. A believer who has walked through difficulty with patience is never the same afterward. They carry a quiet strength. Their faith is not easily shaken because it has already been tested. They are less reactive, more grounded, more compassionate. They understand pain, not theoretically, but experientially. This depth makes them more merciful toward others and more forgiving of themselves. Elevation through trials also means that Allah is preparing the believer for something greater. Just as muscles grow through resistance, the soul grows through hardship. Responsibilities that would have crushed a person before are now manageable. Opportunities that once felt intimidating are now embraced. The believer may not realize it, but Allah has been equipping them all along, shaping them through difficulty, so they can carry future blessings without losing their faith. There are times when the reward of a trial is not seen in this world at all, and this does not make the trial meaningless. On the contrary, it makes it profound. Allah is not limited to rewarding patience here and now. Some rewards are preserved for a day when they will matter far more. A single moment of patience may outweigh years of ease. A single tear shed in sincerity may erase countless sins. The believer who understands this no longer sees hardship as wasted time. What breaks people is not pain itself, but the belief that pain is pointless. When you know that trial is shaping you, raising you, and bringing you closer to Allah, the weight changes. It still hurts, but it does not hollow you out. Instead, it anchors you. You endure not because you are numb, but because you trust the process Allah has chosen for you. In the end, trials are not walls meant to stop you. They are stairs meant to raise you. Each step may be difficult, each climb exhausting, but with every ounce of patience, the believer rises. And when you eventually look back, you may realize that the moment you thought would break, you was the moment Allah lifted you to a level you could never have reached without it. Hope in Allah is not a feeling that appears when life becomes easy. It is a decision the believer makes when everything seems to be falling apart. Despair creeps in quietly, especially when hardship lingers and prayers appear unanswered. It convinces the heart that darkness is permanent and that pain defines the future. But hope in Allah does something extraordinary. It interrupts that narrative. It reminds the believer that no matter how severe the night is, it was never meant to last forever. When a person holds on to hope, they are not denying reality. They are choosing to see beyond it. Hope does not say, this is not hard. It says Allah is greater than this hardship. That distinction is powerful. It allows the believer to acknowledge pain without being consumed by it. Hope becomes the lens through which struggle is viewed, not as an ending, but as a transition. One of the greatest deceptions of despair is that it isolates. It tells the believer that they are alone in their suffering, that no one understands, and that even Allah is distant. Hope counters this lie by reconnecting the heart to its creator. It reminds the believer that Allah is closer than their own breath, fully aware of every silent tear, every unspoken fear, every exhausted sigh. This awareness transforms loneliness into companionship and fear into reassurance, hope in. Allah reshapes patience. Without hope, patience feels like forced endurance, a heavy burden that must be carried until something breaks. With hope, patience becomes active trust. The believer waits, not with bitterness, but with expectation. They continue to pray, to try, to show up, even when outcomes are unclear. This hopeful patience is beloved to Allah because it reflects certainty in His wisdom, even when His plan is not yet visible. When hope takes root, it changes how the believer speaks, thinks, and responds. The language of the heart shifts from "what if it never works out" to "Allah will open a door when the time is right." This shift is not naive optimism, it is spiritual grounding. It prevents the mind from spiraling into worst-case scenarios and anchors it in trust. Even if the believer does not know what the future holds, they know who holds the future. Hope also has the power to restore strength that seemed lost. Many people discover that they are far more resilient than they imagine. Once they stop measuring their capacity by their own limits, and hope is tied to Allah, the believer draws strength from a source that does not diminish. Even exhaustion becomes manageable when the heart believes that relief is meaningful, purposeful, and approaching at the right time. It is important to understand that hope does not always result in the outcome we initially desire. Sometimes Allah answers by giving something different, something better, or something that makes sense only in hindsight. But hope ensures that regardless of the outcome, the believer does not lose themselves in the process. They do not become bitter, hardened, or distant from Allah. Instead, they emerge softer, wiser, and more grounded in faith. Despair narrows the heart, making it rigid and closed. Hope expands it. It allows room for gratitude even in difficulty, for learning even in loss, for growth even in pain. A hopeful heart is able to recognize small mercies that despair would overlook. A kind word, a moment of ease, a brief sense of peace. These become signs that Allah has not abandoned the servant. Hope in Allah also protects faith during delay. Waiting is one of the most difficult tests, especially when there is no clear timeline. Days blend into months, months into years, and the heart grows tired. Hope acts as a shield during this time. It prevents impatience from turning into resentment and prevents longing from turning into doubt. The believer learns to wait without disconnecting, to endure without collapsing inward. Ultimately, hope in Allah transforms despair into strength, not because circumstances instantly change, but because the believer does. The heart becomes anchored in certainty rather than fear. The mind becomes focused on trust rather than worry. And even in the midst of unresolved hardship, there is an inner calm that cannot be explained by logic alone. This kind of hope is not loud or dramatic. It is quiet, steady, and deeply rooted. It whispers to the heart in moments of weakness, "You are not done. Allah is still working." And that whisper is often enough to keep the believer standing, praying, and moving forward one step at a time until the way Allah promised finally becomes clear. There is a moment in every believer's life when hope is tested not by a sudden shock, but by the slow weight of waiting, when nothing seems to change, when prayers are repeated with the same sincerity, yet the situation remains untouched. Patience begins to feel fragile. It is in this space that patience reveals its true meaning, not as passive endurance, but as quiet, unwavering strength rooted in trust that Allah's promise is real, even when the outcome is unseen. Patience in the path of Allah is often misunderstood. Many think it means suppressing pain, ignoring emotion, or pretending that everything is fine. In reality, true patience allows the heart to feel fully, while choosing not to surrender to despair. A patient believer may cry, may feel tired, may even feel confused, but they do not turn away from Allah. They do not abandon prayer. They do not let hardship redefine their relationship with their Creator. This is the kind of patience that leads to victory, even if that victory is delayed. When patience is paired with certainty in Allah, it becomes transformative. The believer begins to see hardship not as an enemy, but as a temporary companion on a much longer journey. This perspective changes everything. Instead of constantly asking, how long will this last? The heart begins to ask, what is Allah teaching me through this? The struggle is no longer meaningless. It becomes a classroom, shaping character, refining intention, and deepening faith. Patience teaches the believer to release the illusion of control. One of the most exhausting aspects of hardship is the constant attempt to manage outcomes. The mind replays scenarios, calculates possibilities, and imagines resolutions. Patience gently interrupts this cycle. It reminds the believer that while effort is required, control is not theirs. There is relief in this realization. When outcomes are handed back to Allah, the heart finds space to breathe again. Strength born from patience is not loud. It does not announce itself or seek recognition. It grows quietly, often unnoticed by others, and even by the believer themselves. One day they realize that what once felt unbearable is now something they carry with grace. Not because the burden is lighter, but because their heart is stronger. This strength is a gift from Allah, cultivated through moments of restraint, perseverance, and continued reliance on Him. Patience also protects the believer from making decisions rooted in panic. In moments of desperation, people often act impulsively, chasing any escape from discomfort. Patience creates a pause. It allows the believer to step back, to wait for clarity, to trust that rushing toward relief may lead away from what Allah has prepared. In this way, patience becomes a form of wisdom, guarding the believer from regret. One of the most beautiful outcomes of patience is how it transforms pain into purpose. The believer who endures hardship with trust often becomes a source of comfort for others. Their words carry depth. Their presence brings reassurance. They understand suffering not from theory, but from lived experience. Allah uses their patience not only to elevate them, but to benefit others through them. It is also important to recognize that patience does not mean silence in the face of pain. The believer is encouraged to speak to Allah, to complain to Him, to pour out every fear and weakness in due way. This does not contradict patience, it completes it. Patience is not holding everything inside. It is choosing the right place to release it. And there is no safer place than the hands of Allah. Over time, patience reshapes how the believer views success. Success is no longer measured only by outcomes, but by faithfulness, by the ability to remain connected to Allah, even when life does not align with expectations. This shift is liberating. It allows the believer to feel at peace, even in unresolved situations, knowing that their effort and sincerity are already valued by Allah. Eventually, the believer comes to understand that patience itself is a form of victory. Every day they endure without losing faith is a triumph. Every prayer made through exhaustion is a step forward. Every moment they resist despair is proof that Allah's strength is supporting them. And when relief finally arrives, whether in this world or the next, it arrives not to an unchanged heart, but to one that has been refined, strengthened, and made ready. In this way, patience turns what once felt impossible into a journey of growth. It does not erase hardship, but it ensures that hardship does not erase the believer. And through patience, Allah fulfills His promise, making a way not only through the difficulty, but beyond it into a deeper, stronger, and more resilient faith.